Hey Restoration, what's up? Brian here. Welcome to another week of Bible stories. We find ourselves here again in my basement with my dogs. They're panting right now because it's super hot outside. And that's the cards that were dealt, right? The dogs are in here. I'm going to preach to them and to you at the same time because I guess dogs need Jesus too, maybe? I don't know. I guess. Why not? That's not true. It's not theologically accurate, so I shouldn't have said that. But we are in our series of Bible stories, and we're going to be covering a few chapters today. And actually, this is going to be a two-parter. We have two parts of Bible stories today that, well, not today. We're going to cover over the next 2 weeks. We've got a story that's going to be a two-parter. That's what I'm trying to say. And this is going to cover a few chapters. There's a lot of stuff in here, and so we thought it best to maybe divide this one up into two different parts. And we could have probably done that with just about every Bible story so far, but I specifically wanted to do it with this one, just because of the scope of everything that happens in this guy's life. So we're going to be in Genesis today. If you want to get a Bible ready, I would say use a device, but you're probably watching it on a device. But maybe you're watching it on your TV and you have a device available, but grab a Bible if you can. We'll be reading from the NLT. But before we get into all that, I just want to say that we as human beings are jacked up. We're all jacked up. There is no person in the history of the world, except for Jesus, that has been exempt from being a jacked up person. We have all varying levels of jacked upness, but our bottom line, our base level, is that we are all jacked up people. And so none of this, what's happening in our country, what's happening around the world, none of this should come as a surprise, but we should have empathy, we should have sympathy, we should have a lot of feelings towards it, and this is a very convoluted issue, and we're not going to get into it quite yet. I just wanted to start off by saying that we're all jacked up people. We see good people doing bad things. We see bad people doing good things. We see good people doing good things and bad people doing bad things. There's nothing new under the sun. The Bible tells us that in Ecclesiastes, that there is absolutely nothing new under the sun. What has been done before. There's nothing new. This is all things that have happened before. We can look in history and see all of these things going on before us. And the job of the Christian is to maintain a level head and to continue pushing the name of Jesus. The job of the Christian is to make everything level and bring Jesus to a fallen world. That's our job. That's where our job ends. We'll get into some of this a little bit later on, but I just wanted to start by saying we're all jacked up humans. It's been a constant theme all throughout the Bible, all throughout history. We see jacked up people everywhere. You're jacked up, I'm jacked up. We're all jacked up. Can we agree that we are all messed up human beings in need of grace, in need of love, in need of mercy? Can we agree on that? There's Republicans who are completely jacked up. There are Democrats who are extremely jacked up. There are libertarians who are extremely jacked up. Everybody is jacked up. And in the story that we have today, we see a lineage of people, a family lineage of some very, very jacked up people. And the story that we're going to get into today is about some jacked up people, a jacked up family. Now this family is all from a guy named Jacob. And we're going to be in Genesis 37. And we're going to be studying the life of Joseph. We are never going to see Joseph's face. It's like Seinfeld, where we never see Steinbrenner's face. This is how this is going to play out for the next couple of weeks. We're never going to see his face. And there's a reason for that. But this is Joseph, all right? Young stud, cool dude, 17 years old or so. And we picked this story up in Genesis 37, starting in verse 2. It says this: "This is the account of Jacob and his family. When Joseph was 17 years old, he often tended his father's flocks. He worked for his half-brothers, the sons of his father's wives, Bilhah and Zilpah." Apparently, Jacob needed wives that only ended with ah. It's not true because he married Rachel too. But Joseph reported to his father some of the bad things his brothers were doing. He's a narc. Jacob loved Joseph more than any of his other children. Problem. because Joseph had been born to him in his old age. So one day, Jacob had a special gift made for Joseph, a beautiful robe. But his brothers hated Joseph because their father loved him more than the rest of them. They couldn't say a kind word to him. So we've got this thing starting out here. We've got Big Joe, and he's 17 years old, and he's a narc, and he's a daddy's boy, and he's very confident, and he's annoying as all get out. Joseph is a kid. You know this kid, right? You know the kid who has all the answers, who tattles, who's a tattletale. You probably have brothers like this or a sister like this, who's a big old tattletale that will just say whatever you do wrong, they're going to go tell mom and dad, right? Or there's that kid who's a know-it-all type of kid who just thinks he has all the answers, and as an adult, you just want to kind of put him in his place, but you know that you can't always do that because, you know, you could go to jail and stuff, but you just want to, don't you just want to smack some of those kids? Now, I'm not condoning violence or any of those types of things, but some of those kids that think that they know it all, that think that they have all of the answers, man, you just want to prove them wrong as best you possibly can. Now, that's my own jacked upness, probably. That's my jacked up self coming through. That's not the love of Jesus coming through. But seriously, if you're 17 years old and you think you're extremely smart and you have no respect for your elders or adults or anything like that, secretly, we don't like you. And maybe it's not a secret. So if you're a student, if you're a teenager, don't be the Joseph teenager, okay? All right, so Joseph and his dad is Jacob. Jacob loves Joseph more than all of his other sons, and there's a few of them. And Jacob loves him because of his old age, and he decides to get him a gift, a coat, a beautiful coat. So, of course, Joseph, being the favorite, he wears this coat everywhere. He doesn't take it off. You know, those super nice blankets that you would always get as a kid. Some of you still use them in bed. You still sleep with your blankie, which is weird. Just gonna say, it's weird. But he's got this coat, and he loves this coat, and he wears it everywhere. And Joseph thinks that he knows everything. He's got all the answers, you know, and he is a person who is able to interpret dreams. God's given this gift to Joseph to be able to interpret dreams. And Joseph has a couple of dreams, and he tells his brothers about the dreams. And I'm sure he didn't tell them in a very humble kind of way. He probably told them in a way that was very confident, very grating, very like nails on a chalkboard when somebody talks. That's probably how the brothers felt when Joseph talked, because Joseph was kind of into himself. Joseph was a very confident person. You know that person. You know the kid. We already covered that. And if I say any more, I'm going to get in trouble. I don't know by who, but I think I'll get in trouble. So one night Joseph has a dream, and he dreams that he's out in a field, and all of these, he's got all these bundles of grain, and all the bundles gathered around before Joseph's bundle and bowed down. They bowed down before Joseph's bundle. So Joseph tells his brothers this dream, and his brothers hate him for it, naturally. And so the brothers are like, so you think that we're going to bow to you someday? Spoiler alert. And then Joseph had another dream, and again his brothers told his brothers about it, but this time his dad was with him, and it was about the sun and the moon and all these stars, and they all bowed down before Joseph. And his dad hears it this time. He's like, don't talk about that. You think that we're going to bow down to you? So now his dad is upset with his favorite son. Uh-oh. And everybody is just, Joseph's getting on everybody's nerves. So Joseph's brothers go to pasture their father's flock. He's a nomad. He's a herder. He has a lot of these flocks. And he sends Joseph out to go check after his other brothers. Now, before we go too much farther in the story, I want to give you a little bit of background on this family. I told you it was a jacked up family, and you're like, wait a second, I know a couple things about this family, and I don't think that they're jacked up. Well, they are, because Joseph's dad, obviously, is Jacob. Now, Jacob was a guy who stole the birthright from his twin brother Esau. You remember that story where his dad was on his deathbed, was close to dying, and he steals the birthright from his brother Esau. Esau was born first, sort of. Jacob came out, went back in, then Esau came out. It was a weird thing, weird birth, but it happened. And Esau is supposed to get the birthright. Jacob tricks his dad into saying, give me the birthright. And so Jacob has the birthright, which is a big deal in Israel. Getting a birthright was a big deal. That means you get the inheritance. That means a whole lot of things. You mean you get the blessing of the family, which is, like I said, a big deal. So we've got Jacob. That's Jacob. He was a deceiver. Jacob got into his... my dog is like right there, and I'm afraid he's going to hit something. Phew, that was a close one. That's my big dog too. Oh, now he's coming over this way. Now he's going to lay under the table. And he didn't hit anything. Great. We're going to keep going. So Jacob, Jacob was Joseph's dad. And also Jacob is the guy who wrestled with God for an entire night. And God broke Jacob's hip and then named him Israel. And he had 12 sons. The 12 tribes of Israel. I don't know if you just thought that the 12 tribes of Israel were just random tribes. They are all born from Jacob's kids. All of these tribes are named after Jacob's kids, and all of Jacob's kids were a tribe of Israel. So that's Jacob. He was a deceiver. He liked to deceive people and lie. And his father, Jacob's dad, was a guy named Isaac. You remember Isaac. Isaac was the guy who almost got sacrificed by his dad and was a son of Abraham and Sarah, which we're going to get to in a moment. Later on, Isaac pretended, this is the jacked upness of Isaac, Isaac pretended that his sister, or that his wife was his sister. They went into this land where the Philistines were, and Abimelech and the Philistines find out that that Isaac's wife is not his sister, but actually his wife, because Abimelech and the Philistines, they see Isaac caressing, the Bible says, or if you read the KJV, they say that Isaac was sporting with his quote-unquote sister. What kind of Kentucky, Alabama jacked upness is that? Right? So they're like, you can't do this. And Isaac's like, okay, you're right. This is my wife. I lied. He's a deceiver. Isaac was a deceiver. He wanted to protect his own self before he protected anyone else. He was always wanting to protect himself first and put himself first. So Isaac does that, and his dad is Abraham. Now, we don't have to say too much about Abraham. Abraham is Father Abraham. You probably know about him. We're going to study him later on in this series. But Father Abraham, he had many sons. I am one of them, and so are you. Almost, I think the stat was 60% or more of the world's religions all can be traced back to Abraham. God said he was going to be the father of many, many, many generations. But Abraham had his faults too, right? Abraham was also a deceiver. He also, this is probably where Isaac gets it from, he also was a deceiver, and he also told people that his wife was a sister. Abraham actually did it twice, because he wanted to protect himself. So this is the lineage of Israel. And Jesus comes from that lineage. He comes from David, who came from the tribe of Judah. Judah was one of the sons of Jacob. And here we have the lineage of Joseph. A jacked up person with a jacked up family. And they didn't like him. So now we're going to get into the rest of the story. Thanks, Paul Harvey. And we're going to cover some verses here. So before we read this, I'm going to stay in the way. Before we read this, so Joseph goes out to check on his brothers in Shechem. Shechem is a place, if you read earlier in this story, which I encourage you to go do, there's a whole bunch of chapters on Jacob and all of Jacob's sons, and there's some messed up stuff. He had a daughter named Dinah, D-I-N-A-H, and she was raped in this place called Shechem. And all of the brothers of Jacob go in, and they literally kill all the men. So the guy, side note, the guy who raped Dinah wanted to marry her. He fell in love with her. and he wanted to marry her. But Jacob and the brother and all of Jacob's sons were like, "This is no way is this happening. No way is that happening." And so they play a trick on him, and they say, "Hey, if you circumcise yourself, you can't be circumcised and have my daughter. It's just not okay. Or you can't be uncircumcised and have my daughter." So he says, "You and your entire town, you and your entire village, go and circumcise all the men. Go circumcise themselves, and then you can have my daughter." Now, I don't know what kind of friend you need to be in order to do something like that for your other brother who needs a lady. I was always taught bros before you know what, which doesn't really apply here. But, this guy did not do that. Anyway, so they all, get the little surgery, and the entire village and Jacob's sons all go there and kill every single man in the village. That's Shechem. So, side note. And I shouldn't have done that because now I'm going to be way behind. So they're in Shechem, and they're looking after the cattle and the herd and all that kind of stuff. And Joseph goes to Shechem. So that's backstory. When Joseph's brothers saw him coming, they recognized him. Isn't that crazy that all of that's in the Bible? You should read it. You really should. These Bible stories, we didn't learn that as kids, did we? No, we did not. We did not learn about Dinah or Dina, however you say your name. We didn't learn about that kind of stuff, did we? Which is why we're doing the series now. All right. When Joseph's brothers saw him coming, they recognized him in the distance. As he approached, they made plans to kill him. "Here comes the dreamer," they said. "Come on, let's kill him and throw him into one of these cisterns. We can tell our father a wild animal has eaten him. Then we'll see what becomes of his dreams." But when Reuben heard of their scheme, he came to Joseph's rescue. "Let's not kill him," he said. "Why should we shed any blood? Let's just throw him into this empty cistern here in the wilderness. Then he'll die without our laying a hand on him." Reuben was secretly planning to rescue Joseph and return him to his father. What a nice guy. So when Joseph arrived, quick note about Reuben. We'll get to that in a minute. So when Joseph arrived, his brothers ripped off the beautiful robe he was wearing. Then they grabbed him and threw him into the cistern. Now the cistern was empty. There was no water in it. Then, just as they were sitting down to eat, they looked up and saw a caravan of camels in the distance coming toward them. It was a group of Ishmaelite traders taking a load of gum, balm, and aromatic resin from Gilead down to Egypt. Judah said to his brothers, "What will we gain by killing our brother? We'd have to cover up the crime. Instead of hurting him, let's sell him to those Ishmaelite traders. After all, he is our brother, our own flesh and blood." After all, he is our brother. And his brothers agreed. And so when the Ishmaelites, who were Midianite traders, came by, Joseph's brothers pulled him out of the cistern and sold him to them for 20 pieces of silver, and the traders took him to Egypt. Sometime later, Reuben returned to get Joseph out of the cistern. I don't know where Reuben was this whole time. When he discovered that Joseph was missing, he tore his clothes in grief. Then he went back to his brothers and lamented, "The boy is gone. What will I do now?" Then the brothers killed a young goat and dipped Joseph's robe in its blood. They sent the beautiful robe to their father with this message: "Look what we found. Doesn't this robe belong to your son?" So we got Joseph here. He's not doing in as good a shape. And I don't know if you can see this or not. This was in our little felt thing. They dipped the blood in, or they dipped the robe in some blood. And no more coat of many colors. Joseph is going to be taken away. And we get there. Their father recognized it immediately. "Yes," he said, "it is my son's robe. A wild animal must have eaten him. Joseph has clearly been torn to pieces." Then Jacob tore his clothes and dressed himself in burlap. He mourned deeply for his son for a long time. His family all tried to comfort him, but he refused to be comforted. "I will go to my grave mourning for my son," he would say, and then he would weep. Meanwhile, the Midianite traders arrived in Egypt, where they sold Joseph to Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh, the king of Egypt. Potiphar was captain of the palace guard. So that's the story, the beginning of the story of Joseph. And I just got to go back to the intro thing of we are all jacked up people. His brothers are jacked up. How jacked up do you have to be to let your father cry like that and weep like that and not actually tell him the truth, that their brother is alive and well and in Egypt as a slave? Did that thought cross my mind today? I was like, what in the world? How in the world Could you sit there and watch your own father grieve that much and still hold on to that secret, to that truth? How much do you have to hate your brother in order to not have empathy for their dad when they know the truth? It's a jacked up family. And no doubt we all have jacked up families, am I right? But man, what kind of a movement did God start with these people? Like, how did Abraham make the cut? How did Jacob make the cut? How did Joseph make the cut? He was a snarky little narc. See, God chose those people because he wanted to make it clear that this was a movement by God, not by people. There are no perfect people. There's no one that's going to come to our rescue. There are no perfect people. The only perfect person that's ever lived was Jesus. And he's the only one that's going to do it. And he was 100% God as well. We're not going to get there. But with the power of God, if we rely on God, if we look to God, then we can see huge changes in our lives, even in our jacked upness, right? Because all of these guys, these people that we listed, we've got Abraham, we've got Isaac, we've got Jacob, we've got Joseph. If you could turn to Hebrews 11, if you look in Hebrews 11, they actually say that these were men of faith. They call it, this chapter, Hebrews 11, is called the Hall of Faith. And all of these guys are commended for their faith. As jacked up as they are, as ridiculous as they are, as ridiculous as you are, as ridiculous as I am, my faith in Christ covers all of that, and I'm not seen as a jacked up human, but of someone who is loved. So we've got this story of the brothers taking on Joseph and selling him into slavery. And there's one guy who seems like he's a good dude, right? We've got this one guy, his brother Reuben, who seemed like he wanted to do the right thing. Reuben was a guy who seemed like he wanted to do the right thing. But all Reuben was really doing was just trying to appease everyone. He didn't want to tell his brothers to not do that. Not to mention his brothers wouldn't listen to him in the first place, even if he had tried, because Reuben has his own jacked upness. See, Jacob also had wives, and he also had concubines. We're rated R here at Restoration. This is a Restoration shirt. And Reuben, when Jacob was away mourning somebody's death, I can't remember exactly whose it was. You can tell me later, or look it up for yourself. Jacob is away mourning. Actually, I don't have time. And Reuben goes and sleeps with Jacob's concubine, or sports, or whatever you want to call it, has relations. He has sex with a concubine of Jacob's. So the brothers don't really trust Reuben. They don't really like Reuben because of all of these things that he's done. And Jacob never lets Reuben forget it. Because later on, when Jacob, on his deathbed, sends a blessing to all of the children of the tribes of Israel, Reuben, in his blessing, he remembers. Jacob remembers. Anyway, this is not where we're going. Reuben is a guy who tried to appease everyone, but he didn't help anyone. He tried to keep his own face and do everything. So where does this lead us? How does this get us to where we are? Well, I talked a little bit about how the family history, right? Of how Joseph was, how his dad was a deceiver, how all of his brothers are now deceivers, trying to deceive their father, taking it to a whole new level, if I might add. Jacob was a deceiver. Isaac was a deceiver. Abraham was a deceiver. And what we see happening is what we call the sins of the father. The sins of the father. Now, this is something that is grounded in Scripture. We can look at it, that sins of the father are passed on from generation to generation. Whatever it is that you deal with, if you're a husband here, or if you're a mother, or whatever it is, if you're a parent, you're passing on things to your children. And much smarter people than me have talked about this before, that if you are someone who's addicted to anything, whether it's sex, drugs, alcohol, we've talked about addiction before. If you're addicted to those types of things, that shows up in your genes, not your genes, but in your makeup. And there's a void missing that is it deals with addiction. And it gets passed on from generation to generation. That means if your father was an alcoholic, there's a good chance that you might be. Or you're more susceptible to that type of thing. You have to be more aware of those types of things. Sins of the father are passed on from generation to generation. In fact, in Exodus chapter 34, Moses needs to redo the 10 Commandments because he broke the ones. And so God takes Moses to Mount Sinai again, and God says this. He literally says this to Moses. The Lord passed in front of Moses, calling out, Yahweh, the Lord, the God of compassion and mercy. I am slow to anger and filled with unfailing love and faithfulness. I lavish unfailing love to 1,000 generations. I forgive iniquity, rebellion, and sin. But I do not excuse the guilty. I lay the sins of the parents upon their children and grandchildren. The entire family is affected, even children in the third and fourth generation. So if you think that your little sin, your little pet sin, is just something that you can just deal with or not deal with and just keep it to yourself, not tell anyone, not have any issues with it, just kind of like keep everything swept under the rug, you are dead wrong, because it will get passed on from generation to generation. If you think that it's affecting no one, then you're passing it on from generation to generation. If you think that you're deceiving, you're lying, is not going to get passed on from generation to generation. It's going to get passed on. Our kids are all born with certain attributes. You can look at our children's personality. I can look at my own kids and see the personalities in them. And see how, if they're in an environment that is not healthy for them, how those habits, how those personalities can be warped to something terrible. One of my daughters is just loves pleasing people. She loves to do things for people. She loves helping out. She loves making sure that people are well taken care of. Now, in a dysfunctional home, let's say you have an alcoholic father or an alcoholic mother or something where there's a void somewhere. And I'm not trying to make light of any of this kind of stuff. I'm just trying to tell you the way that I see it. If she was in that situation, that personality trait that I love about her, that wants to care for people, that loves people, that has empathy for people. And I've got a son that's the exact same way. I remember going down the street, we were going to a concert in Detroit, and he passed a homeless person. And I don't remember exactly what he wrote, if he had any money on him. I don't remember, but he handed something over to that homeless person. And he has empathy for people. Now, if we take that and we put it in a situation, not saying that I have a perfect family and that my life is perfect. Believe me, it is not. There are things that I'm worried about in my own life that I'm worried about passing on, and I see being passed on to my children. And it breaks my heart. But if we take their personalities the way that they are and we put that in a dysfunctional, very dysfunctional home, then the person who has empathy becomes a codependent person. See, it gets warped in a way that you always have to take care of that person. You always have to be around that person to take care of them, and it becomes a huge issue. Sins of the father is a huge issue, and it will be carried on from generation to generation if it is not dealt with. Abraham was a deceptor, putting his own life in his own hands and not trusting God. Isaac did the exact same thing, and so did Jacob, and Jacob passed it on to his sons, the tribes of Israel. So that tells us is that we can't be complacent with sin. Don't be complacent with sin. We can't just sweep things under the rug and pretend that they don't exist anymore. We can't just sweep it all under and say, oh, I don't know what you're talking about. This is all, I live a perfect life. That's why I started this whole message up by saying we are jacked up people. We need to agree that we are jacked up people, that we don't have all the answers, that we don't have it figured out, especially at a time like this. We can't be complacent with sin. Complacency leads to being complicit, which leads to culpability. Now, those are all really big words that all start with C. So I want to just, for a few moments, I just want to say that what this kind of looks like. when we're complacent with sin, this is kind of the step of what happens. When we're complacent with the things in our lives, this is what's going to happen. Now, complacent just simply means, complacency is when you feel you've arrived. When you've arrived, when I don't need to grow anymore, I don't need to learn anymore, I don't need church, I've learned everything I need to know from church, from this group of people, I don't need to be there because I've arrived. I know everything, or at least I feel good enough. It's not even that you think you know everything, it's that you're comfortable with all of your flaws, with all of your failures, and you just don't have the energy to do anything anymore. You don't want to get any better. You kind of like the way that you feel. Complacency is when you get lazy and you feel you've arrived, that you don't want to deal with this stuff anymore. So complacency is when we're going to let things slip. We're going to let it slide. Okay, I'll look at one picture. Okay, yeah, she's got a bikini on, so that's fine. What happens if she takes that off, though? Well, okay, I mean, just one. You know what? I haven't had a drink in 25 years. What's one gonna do? What's one gonna hurt? That's what happens when we let complacency set in. Next is complicit. We become complicit is when you are involved with others in doing wrong. We become complicit with sin. We now are sharing it with other people. We're not stopping it. Complacency is letting it come in. Complicit is not stopping sin. Complicit is saying that I'm just going to let this keep happening and I'm going to not even try to stop it anymore. I'm just going to start inviting it into what I'm doing. I'm complicit with it. Complicit is when you are involved with others in doing wrong. It's the legal definition of complicit. If you're complicit in a murder, that means you had some sort of effect on the murder. You didn't have to be the person who murdered, but you had to be involved. You had to be there. Something had to happen while you were there. You were involved with it. And when we're complacent, when we're silent with sin, when we're complacent with it, this is what happens. Then we become complicit. We allow even more of it to come into our lives. And when we're complicit, we're culpable. Culpable is when you deserve blame. And my friends, we all deserve blame. And this is the part of the message that I've been dreading for 3 weeks. I don't pretend to have all the answers. I hope that you can see that all of this is very raw. I mean, my dog, I'm in my basement, okay? I'm not going to make any bones about this being some polished thing, and I never want it to be. I don't ever want to be polished. But I've been struggling with this for 3 weeks. And up until this morning, still starting the message, I didn't know where I was going to take this. I have a brother who's a police officer out in Colorado. So I have a vested interest in what's happening in the world right now. I have friends who are black who can tell me about times that they've faced oppression. I have a friend who owned his own business in California, his own software development company. He's a black friend of mine. And he couldn't put on his business card that he was the owner, because if he was the owner, it meant people would turn away from his business. But if he just put that he was the operations manager, that was fine. That was okay. People could handle it if he was the operations manager. As long as there was somebody above him in charge, they could handle it. We have an issue. And we've been silent about it. We've been complacent. We've been complacent with our sin. We've been complacent with racism. We've been complacent as a society on letting the poor stay poor and letting the rich stay rich. This is not political. This is not something against capitalism. I'm all for capitalism, and I'm all for free speech, and I'm all for whatever it is that you want to think right now. This is not a political statement. But the church is meant to look after the orphans and the widows and those who are less fortunate than us. And right now in our country, we have an entire race of people and an entire socioeconomic culture of people who are in desperate need of our attention and in desperate need of our faith in Christ. I heard this on a message just yesterday, that our body, the church body, is hurting right now. And instead of just ignoring it and saying, well, it's not affecting me, I'm not hurt by it, we can't do that. We have to address the issues. We cannot be complacent. We cannot be complicit. And we cannot be culpable. And we haven't spoken up. Actually, some of us have spoken up. I'll give you that. Some of us have spoken up. But the things that we're saying when we speak up are... We care more about a political agenda. We care more about keeping our own comforts than we do about the cross and people knowing who Jesus is. And my friends, racism is still something that exists in this country. And it's not enough to say, well, I'm not racist. There needs to be rebuke, or there needs to be rebuke. And I'm not saying that everything that's going on is right. I'm not saying that everything that's going on is wrong. But we can't get distracted. And we need to rise above it. You guys, your political agenda, your political posts are not uniting. But you're spreading people out. You're dividing. And I am sick of it. I can't tell you how many people I have unfollowed on social media. I took Facebook off of my phone, and I go there. I just go to the website if I need to. I cannot tell you how many people, Christian people, that I have unfollowed because of your... Gosh, I am so close to swearing. Because of all of the political BS that's happening right now. And I don't see an ounce of Jesus. Fellow Christian, we have to be better. This is what defines us. It is not a political party. It is not an economic status. It is not your job. It is not your family. It is not the color of your skin. The thing that defines us is Jesus. The thing that divides us is Satan. And right now, Satan is having his day. Now is the time for listening. Now is the time to shut up. And if you want to stop following, if you want to stop listening, if you want to stop coming to things, please shut up if you're not going to be talking gospel. The good news. That's what we need to be talking about. The good news. We've got to do something, you guys. Edmund Burke was a philosopher in Ireland in like the 1700s. And he said this: the only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is for good men to do nothing. And right now there's a lot of good men doing nothing, and a lot of good men only protecting their own selves and not showing Jesus to a world that desperately needs it. Are you kidding me, people? I don't know. I'm going to skip my last point because I'm way over time. I'll tell you real quick what it was. It's what's not transformed is transferred. What's not transformed is transferred. Okay, so I'm not going to skip the point. So sue me. Here's the thing. What's not transformed is transferred. And what this means, I heard this from a friend a long time ago, and I actually used it in a message several years ago. But what this means is that what I don't change on the inside of me, what I don't understand about the inside of me, and the sin issues in my heart that I'm chasing after, that I'm not owning up to, that I'm being silent about, those things are going to be transferred on to my family for generations to come. And people say that racism is no longer an issue because slavery was a long time ago. Guys, it wasn't even 3 generations ago. The sins of the father are passed on from generation to generation. The sins of the father are passed on from generation to generation until we put a stop to it and actively try to do something to stop it, to be against it. What's not transformed is transferred. We need to transform our hearts. And the way that we do that is with grace and love. Guys, the entire story of the cross is grace and love. The entire story of our lives need to be grace and love. The entire story of our Facebook posts need to be grace and love. Look at what Jesus did on the cross for us. At any moment, he could have decided to not do that anymore and gotten his own way. Our response, grace and love. So what does that look like? That means our response to police officers who are doing a bad job, grace and love. And that may be hard to hear for some of us. Yes, they did something wrong. Grace and love. That means our response to good police officers, grace and love. Well, that's easier to swallow. And that means a different person, a person who has a different color of skin than you, gets grace and love. That means this person with the same color of skin with you gets grace and love. That means the person who's spouting off on social media that you don't agree with, that you don't like, that you can't stand, that you can't believe that this happened, grace and love. That means to the person across the aisle, whether you're a Democrat and it's a Republican, or it's a Republican and it's a Democrat, guess what you need to have? Grace and love. Because you know what? The amount of grace and love that's been given to you, that's been given to me, I know who I am, I know my faults, I know everything that I've done wrong my entire life. I might have a bad memory, but not about the things that I do wrong. I know about them, and I know that I suck as a human being. I am a jacked up person, but God has given me, in His mercy, grace, and love through the cross of Jesus Christ. And people, no one's life is going to get changed if we don't also offer grace and love to them. The same amount that's been given to us needs to get projected out. Grace and love doesn't end with us. We are an outlet of grace and love. So before you post, put on the filter of grace and love. The only way we're going to change this world is with grace and love. The only way you're going to rise above the issues that you see, the only way that we can focus not on the issues right in front of us, but up towards Jesus, to the cross, to the love that we've received, to the grace that we've received, the only way that we're going to do that is if we're also offering grace and love. Look at it with a lens of grace and love. I hope this makes sense. I hope it's clear. I really do. I'm sorry I wasn't as funny today as I usually am. I am not kidding. I am so over all of the BS that I see on social media from both sides. I'd like us to practice at Restoration Church just an ounce of grace and love. Because here's the thing, Restoration Church, listen up. Are you listening? Here's the thing. We're doing some pretty crazy stuff. We're meeting in a brewery. Well, right now we're in my basement, but we're going to be meeting in a brewery. We're going to be having beers. We have shirts that says beer plus Jesus. I can omit this and it doesn't make any sense. I can omit this and it doesn't reach anyone. We're going to be doing some crazy, crazy stuff at Restoration Church. And people are going to be looking to us for grace and love. And if I've seen anything over the last few weeks from some of our people, it is that it is not grace and love. It's about, what do I need to do to make myself feel better? And I will die on that hill. And I will shut this whole thing down if we are not showing grace and love. I am that serious. I love you, and I'm going to show you grace and love. And I have been showing you grace and love. And I hope that you'll show me grace and love. Because, guys, I'm not going to get this right. I'm going to get this wrong more often than not. Heck, last week, I thought my message sucked. But I appreciate the grace and love that you give me. And come back here and listen again. What would the world look like, you guys, if we offered that to one another? If we were just, you know what? I'm going to give grace and love today. I don't care who I encounter, the type of person that I meet. It could be a police officer that is a twisted cop, or it could be a great cop. It could be an ex-spouse. It could be children. It could be a coworker that I really don't like. What would it look like in all of those situations if I just went with a theme of grace and love in every instance, in every scenario? God, I pray for grace and love. God, I pray for that in my own life, for the people around me. Help me not to get so worked up when bad people do bad things and when good people do bad things. But God, help me to see it through a lens of grace and love. God, help this church to be a church of grace and love. God, we need you more than ever. We love you and we thank you for your Son, Jesus. It's in his name we pray. Amen.